The frantic pounding of hooves against the hard, packed desert earth was the only sound that dared to break the twilight stillness as Heath Thornton raced his stallion toward the dilapidated Bradford estate on the outskirts of San Jose, California. The year was 1875, and news of Winifred Kent's imprisonment had reached him not an hour ago, sending him charging through the gathering darkness with nothing but vengeance and rescue on his mind. The gold rush that had transformed California in the previous decades had left its mark on the landscape and its people, creating fortunes and feuds alike. The Bradford family had amassed wealth through mining claims and cattle, but their reputation for cruelty was as solid as the gold that lined their pockets. Old Man Bradford had arranged a marriage between his business partner's son and Winifred, the young woman who had arrived in San Jose just 6 months prior to teach at the newly established schoolhouse. Heath pulled back on the reins as he approached the sprawling ranch house, its windows glowing amber against the darkening sky. He knew Winifred only in passing, their conversations limited to brief exchanges when he delivered mail to the schoolhouse or tipped his hat to her in town. But something about her quiet strength and kind eyes had stayed with him. When he'd overheard drunken talk at the saloon about how Bradford had locked her in the root cellar for refusing to marry his partner's son, something inside Heath had snapped. He dismounted, tethering his horse to a mesquite tree just beyond the property line. The ranch hands would be finishing their evening meals, and Bradford himself would likely be enjoying his whiskey in the study. Heath had ridden with Bradford's crew for a season 2 years back, before the man's increasingly volatile temperament and dishonest business dealings had driven him to seek work elsewhere. He knew the layout of the property, and more importantly, he knew where the cellar doors were located. Crouching low, he made his way through the shadows of the outbuildings. A dog barked in the distance, but no alarm was raised as Heath pressed his back against the cool adobe wall of the main house. The smell of supper still hung in the air, mixing with the ever-present dust of the California chaparral. The root cellar entrance was around the back, accessible via 2 angled wooden doors that opened from the ground. As Heath approached, he could see that they'd been secured with a heavy iron padlock. His hand went to his belt where his revolver rested, but he thought better of it. Gunshots would only bring unwanted attention. Instead, he removed the small crowbar he'd had the foresight to bring, wedging it between the doors and applying his considerable strength. The wood groaned in protest, and Heath paused, listening for any sign that he'd been discovered. When no shouts came, he resumed his work, forcing the crowbar deeper until he heard the satisfying crack of splintering wood. The padlock held, but the hasp tore free from the weathered planks. Heath lifted one of the doors slowly to minimize noise. A rush of cool, damp air met his face as he peered into the darkness below. "Miss Kent," he called softly, unsure if she was conscious or even still there. A rustling sound came from below, followed by a tremulous voice. "Who's there? Please, I've done nothing wrong." "Miss Kent, it's Heath Thornton. I've come to get you out, Mr. Thornton." Her voice was weak but carried a note of hope. "How did you know time for that now? Can you climb the ladder? I need to get you away from here before Bradford or his men discover us." I think so." Heath heard movement in the darkness. A moment later, he could make out her form ascending the wooden ladder that led up from the earthen cellar floor. Her normally pristine dress was soiled with dirt, her honey-colored hair falling in tangled waves around her shoulders. When she reached the top, he extended his hand, helping her the rest of the way. "Thank you," she whispered, her legs unsteady beneath her. "They've kept me down there since yesterday morning. No food, just a little water." Heath's jaw clenched in anger, but he kept his voice gentle. "Can you walk?" My horse is just beyond the property. Winifred nodded, determination flashing in her eyes despite her weakened state. I'll manage. They had only taken a few steps when a voice boomed across the yard. What in tarnation is going on out here? Bradford stood on the back porch, his substantial frame silhouetted against the light from the house. In his hand was a shotgun, already raised to firing position. "Run," Heath whispered, pushing Winifred toward the shelter of a nearby shed. Bradford fired, the shot going wide as Heath drew his revolver and returned fire, aiming for the porch post rather than the man. The distraction worked. Bradford ducked back inside, bellowing for his men. Heath grabbed Winifred's hand, and together they sprinted across the open yard toward the boundary of the property where his horse waited. Behind them, shouts and the sound of boots on wooden floors indicated that the ranch hands were mobilizing. "I can't leave you here," Winifred gasped as they ran. "They'll kill you." "They'll have to catch us first," Heath replied grimly. They reached his horse just as the first of Bradford's men emerged from the main house. Heath boosted Winifred up onto the saddle, then swung himself up behind her. With a kick to the stallion's flanks, they were off, racing away from the ranch and into the protective darkness of the California night. Winifred clung to the saddle horn, her body tense against Heath's chest as they rode. The wind whipped her hair back, occasionally brushing against his face with the scent of lavender still detectable beneath the earthy smell of the cellar. "Where are we going?" she called over her shoulder. "I have a friend with a cabin in the foothills," Heath answered, his voice close to her ear. "Bradford won't find us there." They rode hard for nearly an hour, following winding trails that led away from San Jose and into the rugged terrain that bordered the Santa Clara Valley. Only when Heath was certain they weren't being followed did he slow their pace, allowing his horse to catch its breath. The cabin belonged to an old prospector named Marcus, who had struck a modest vein years ago and now lived comfortably in town, using his cabin only for hunting trips. Heath had helped the old man rebuild his roof the previous spring, and in return, Marcus had offered him use of the place whenever he needed. As they approached the small structure nestled among the pines, Heath felt Winifred sag against him, her exhaustion finally claiming her now that the immediate danger had passed. "Stay awake a little longer, Miss Kent," he urged. "We're almost there." The cabin was simple but sturdy, a single room with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed against one wall, and a table with 2 chairs. Heath helped Winifred dismount, supporting her weight when her legs threatened to give way. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I haven't eaten in so long, and the fear." "No need to apologize," Heath assured her. "Let's get you inside and rested." He settled her in one of the chairs before tending to his horse, unsaddling the animal and providing water from the nearby stream. When he returned to the cabin, he found Winifred with her head resting on the table, half asleep. The sight of her, this educated, refined woman who had shown such kindness to the children of San Jose, reduced to such a state, stirred a protective instinct within him that he hadn't known existed. Heath lit the oil lamp that hung from the ceiling beam, casting a warm glow throughout the cabin. He stoked a fire in the fireplace, then rummaged through the provisions that Marcus always kept stocked: dried beans, salt pork, and coffee. It wasn't much, but it would sustain them. "Miss Kent," he said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder, "I'm going to prepare something for you to eat. Why don't you rest on the bed?" She lifted her head, her green eyes meeting his. "I don't want to impose. It's no imposition. You need your strength." Winifred nodded, rising unsteadily to her feet. Heath supported her arm as she crossed to the bed and sat down heavily. "Thank you, Mr. Thornton. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "There's nothing to repay," he said, turning back to the task of preparing a simple meal. As the aroma of cooking food filled the small space, Heath heard Winifred's voice, soft and reflective. "I came to California to escape the confines of Boston society, to make a difference in the lives of children who might not otherwise receive an education." She gave a bitter laugh. "Instead, I found myself in another prison, expected to marry a man I've never met to satisfy some business arrangement." Heath stirred the beans in the pot before responding. "Bradford has always valued wealth over people. When his wife died 3 years ago, something in him hardened even further. He said I was ungrateful," Winifred continued, "that a woman in my position should be thankful for the opportunity to marry into such prosperity." Heath turned to face her, his expression serious. "There's more to life than prosperity, Miss Kent." "Winifred," she corrected him. "After what you've done for me tonight, I think formalities are unnecessary." "Winifred," he repeated, testing the name. "And I'm Heath." A small smile touched her lips, the first he'd seen since her rescue. It transformed her face, despite the dirt and fatigue that marked it. Heath found himself returning the smile, a warmth spreading through him that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the hearth. He served her a bowl of beans and pork, along with a cup of strong coffee. Winifred ate slowly at first, then with increasing enthusiasm as her body responded to the nourishment. Heath ate his own portion standing by the window, watching for any sign of pursuit. "What will happen now?" Winifred asked when she had finished eating. "I can't return to town. Bradford will simply have me captured again, or worse." Heath set his empty bowl aside. "We'll rest tonight. In the morning, we'll need to decide our next move. I have friends in Sacramento who might be able to help." "I have nowhere to go," she admitted, her voice small. "No family here, no means of support if I can't teach." "You won't be alone," Heath assured her. "I promise you that." As the night deepened, Heath insisted that Winifred take the bed while he made do with a bedroll on the floor near the fire. Despite her protests, exhaustion quickly claimed her, and soon the cabin was filled with the sound of her steady breathing. Heath lay awake, his mind turning over the events of the evening and the complications that would surely follow. Bradford wasn't a man to let a slight go unanswered. There would be consequences for what Heath had done, but as he glanced at Winifred's sleeping form, he knew he wouldn't change his decision. The morning dawned clear and crisp, sunlight filtering through the cabin's single window to cast patterns on the rough-hewn floor. Heath had risen before sunrise, checking the surroundings for any sign of pursuit before hunting for fresh meat to supplement their breakfast. Winifred was awake when he returned, her face freshly washed with water from the bucket he'd brought in earlier. She had attempted to tidy her appearance, pinning up her hair as best she could without a mirror. The effect was somewhat haphazard but endearing. "Good morning," she greeted him, a touch of color in her cheeks that hadn't been there the night before. "I hope you slept well." "Well enough," Heath replied, holding up a pair of rabbits he'd snared. "Breakfast." They worked together to prepare the meal, Winifred insisting on helping despite Heath's suggestion that she continue to rest. As they ate, Heath outlined his plan. "We should leave for Sacramento as soon as possible. I have a friend there, a lawyer named James Sullivan. He might be able to help us understand your legal options." Winifred nodded, her face thoughtful. "Do you think Bradford can legally force me to marry his partner's son?" "No," Heath said firmly. "But that doesn't mean he won't try to use other means to get his way. The man has influence in these parts." "What about you?" she asked. "Won't helping me put you at risk?" Heath shrugged, a half-smile playing on his lips. "Bradford and I have never been fond of each other. This just gives him one more reason to dislike me. The journey to Sacramento would take several days, and they would need supplies." Heath decided they would skirt San Jose entirely. heading instead to a smaller settlement where he had acquaintances who might be willing to provide what they needed without asking too many questions. They set out mid-morning, Winifred riding behind Heath once more. The day was warming quickly, the California sun beating down on the golden hills that rolled toward the horizon. Heath was acutely aware of Winifred's arms around his waist, the way she leaned against him when the terrain grew rough. "Tell me about yourself," she said as they rode. "You know my story now, but I know very little about you." Heath considered the question, unused to speaking about himself. "Not much to tell. Born in Missouri, came west with my father after my mother died. We tried our hand at mining, but the easy gold was gone by then. He took work on ranches, taught me the trade. When he passed, I continued on, drifting from job to job. And now I work for the Wells Fargo stage line, ride shotgun mostly, sometimes deliver mail to the outlying areas. It's steady work." "Is that how you heard about my situation?" Heath nodded. "News travels fast in small towns. When I stopped at the saloon yesterday, the talk was all about how old Bradford had locked up the schoolteacher for refusing his arrangement." Winifred was quiet for a moment. "Thank you, Heath, for caring enough to come for me." The simple gratitude in her voice made something catch in his chest. Anyone would have done the same. "No," she said softly. "They wouldn't have. The whole town knew, yet you were the only one who came." Heath had no response to that. They rode in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts as the miles passed beneath the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves. By late afternoon, they reached the settlement of Willow Creek, a collection of buildings that served the surrounding farms and ranches. Heath brought them to a stop outside a general store with peeling paint and a sagging porch. "Wait here," he instructed Winifred. "The owner, Samuel, is a good man. He'll help us without spreading word." Inside, Heath found the elderly shopkeeper tallying the day's sales in a ledger. Samuel looked up, recognition lighting his weathered face. "Heath Thornton. Haven't seen you in these parts for months. What brings you by?" Heath explained their situation, keeping the details vague but emphasizing their need for discretion. Samuel's expression grew serious as he listened. "Bradford's a powerful man," he warned. "Crosses him don't tend to fare well." "I'm aware," Heath replied, "but I couldn't stand by and do nothing." Samuel nodded slowly. "No, I don't suppose you could. Always did have more conscience than sense." He closed his ledger. "Tell me what you need." With Samuel's help, Heath acquired supplies for their journey: food, ammunition, a bedroll for Winifred, and a change of clothes for her that Samuel's wife provided from their daughter's trunk. The old couple insisted on feeding them as well, serving a hearty meal at their table in the rooms behind the store. Samuel's wife, Martha, fussed over Winifred, clearly distressed by her ordeal. "You poor dear," she clucked, setting a second helping of stew before her. "To think of a gentleman like Bradford behaving in such a manner, it's shameful." "Do you know if anyone's looking for us?" Heath asked Samuel as they ate. The shopkeeper nodded grimly. "Word came through this morning. Bradford's offering a reward for information about the schoolteacher's whereabouts. Says she was kidnapped by a former employee of his." Winifred's spoon clattered against her bowl. "That's a lie. He imprisoned me." "Of course he did, dear," Martha soothed. "But Mr. Bradford controls the narrative in these parts. His version is the one most will hear." Heath's jaw tightened. "All the more reason to reach Sacramento quickly. We'll need legal help to counter his claims." They spent the night in a small room at the back of the store, Winifred taking the narrow bed while Heath once again slept on the floor. Despite her protests, he insisted on the arrangement, acutely aware of the impropriety of their situation, and determined to preserve her reputation as much as possible under the circumstances. As he drifted toward sleep, Heath heard Winifred's voice in the darkness. "Heath, are you awake?" "Yes," he answered. "I'm frightened," she admitted. "Not just of Bradford, but of what lies ahead. I came to California to build a life for myself, and now everything is uncertain." Heath propped himself up on one elbow, able to make out her silhouette in the moonlight that filtered through the room's small window. "We'll figure it out together, Winifred, one day at a time. You've barely known me a day, and yet you're risking everything to help me." "Sometimes a day is all it takes to know what's right," he replied. There was a pause, and then, so softly he almost didn't hear it, "I'm glad it was you who came for me." The words followed Heath into his dreams, where Winifred's face, illuminated by moonlight, became the center of a future he hadn't known he wanted. They departed before dawn, hoping to put as much distance as possible between themselves and any potential pursuers. Samuel provided them with a rough map marking the safest route to Sacramento, avoiding main roads and settlements where word of Bradford's reward might have spread. The terrain grew more challenging as they headed northeast, the rolling hills giving way to steeper, more forested landscapes. Heath pushed their pace when possible, but was mindful of not exhausting their horse. By midday, they had reached a high ridge that offered a panoramic view of the valley below. "It's beautiful," Winifred remarked as they paused to rest. "I've never seen such vastness." Heath nodded, taking a drink from his canteen before passing it to her. "California has its share of wonders, different from the East, I imagine." "Very different," she agreed. "In Boston, everything feels contained. Buildings pressed together, people always watching, judging. Out here, there's a sense of possibility that I've never felt before." "Is that why you came west? For the possibilities?" Winifred smiled, a wistful expression crossing her face. "My father was a professor at Harvard. He believed in education for women, encouraged me to pursue my studies when others thought it improper. After he died, my mother remarried a man who found my independence troubling." Her smile faded. "He was determined to see me suitably married to one of his business associates, a man 3 times my age with a reputation for cruelty similar to Bradford's." "So you ran," Heath concluded. "I chose a different path," she corrected. The teaching position in San Jose was advertised in a Boston newspaper. It seemed like Providence a chance to use my education while escaping an unwanted marriage. Heath studied her profile, impressed by her courage, only to find yourself facing the same situation here. "Yes, though I never imagined Bradford would go so far as to lock me in a cellar." She turned to look at him directly. "But then, I never imagined someone like you would come to my rescue either." The warmth in her gaze made Heath's heart quicken. He cleared his throat, suddenly finding it difficult to meet her eyes. "We should keep moving. There's a creek a few miles ahead where we can refill the canteens." They continued their journey through the afternoon, the conversation flowing more easily between them now. Winifred asked about his experiences in the West, and Heath found himself sharing stories he'd never told anyone about the beauty of a desert sunrise, the camaraderie around a campfire, the freedom of riding across open country with nothing but the sky above and the earth below. In turn, she told him about growing up in Boston, about her father's extensive library where she'd spent countless hours, and about her dreams of establishing a proper school in the West, where boys and girls alike could receive an education regardless of their background. "You speak of it with such passion," Heath observed as they made camp that evening in a small clearing sheltered by oak trees. "Teaching must be more than just a job for you." Winifred nodded, helping him gather wood for a small fire. "Education changed my life. Books opened worlds to me that I would never have known otherwise. I want to give that same opportunity to others, especially to girls who might otherwise be limited by society's expectations. Heath watched as she arranged the kindling, her movements precise despite her lack of experience with outdoor living. "That's a noble calling. What about you?" she asked. "What drives you, Heath Thornton? What do you want from life?" The question caught him off guard. For years, he'd been focused on survival, on making his way from one job to the next. The future had always been a vague concept, something to worry about tomorrow. "I suppose I've never thought about it much," he admitted. "After my father died, I was just trying to get by. And now—" Her eyes reflected the first flickering flames as the fire caught. "Now." Heath considered the question seriously. "I'd like a place of my own someday, not just land but a home, something permanent." The admission surprised him as much as it seemed to please Winifred. She smiled, the firelight casting a golden glow across her features. "That sounds wonderful." They ate a simple meal of beans and hard tack, supplemented by jerky from their supplies. As night fell, the temperature dropped sharply, and Heath noticed Winifred shivering despite her proximity to the fire. "Here," he said, shrugging out of his jacket and draping it around her shoulders. "But you'll be cold," she protested. "I'm used to it," he assured her. "Been sleeping under the stars many a night." Winifred pulled the jacket tighter around herself, inhaling deeply. "It smells like you," she said softly, "like leather and pine." Heath felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. "Try to get some sleep. We have a long ride tomorrow." She nodded, settling onto her bedroll. "Good night, Heath." "Good night, Winifred." Heath stayed awake long after she had fallen asleep, keeping watch and pondering the strange turn his life had taken. 2 days ago, he'd been a solitary man with few attachments and simpler concerns. Now, he found himself responsible for this remarkable woman who spoke of education and possibilities with such conviction. More than that, he found himself wanting to be a part of those possibilities, to see where this unexpected journey might lead them beyond the immediate crisis. It was a dangerous thought, given their circumstances, but one he couldn't quite push away as he watched the stars wheel overhead. The third day of their journey brought them to rougher country, the foothills becoming steeper as they approached the Sierra Nevada range. Heath chose a more challenging route, reasoning that Bradford's men would stick to the easier paths if they were in pursuit. They were crossing a narrow stream when Winifred suddenly pointed toward the ridge they had descended an hour earlier. "Heath, look!" A group of riders had appeared on the horizon, moving steadily in their direction. From this distance, it was impossible to identify them, but Heath wasn't willing to take chances. "Into the trees," he directed, urging the horse forward onto the bank and into the dense forest that lined the stream. They rode deeper into the woods, following game trails when possible, creating their own path when necessary. The going was slow, branches snagging at their clothing, the undergrowth sometimes so thick that Heath had to dismount and lead the horse by the reins. "You think it's Bradford's men?" Winifred asked, her voice hushed despite the distance they'd put between themselves and the riders. "Can't be certain, but we should assume so," Heath replied. "They know these lands better than most, and Bradford has the resources to mount a thorough search." They traveled until dusk, when the fading light made further progress through the dense forest too dangerous. Heath found a small hollow surrounded by boulders that would shield any firelight from distant eyes. "We shouldn't risk a fire tonight," he said as they made camp. "The smoke might give away our position." Winifred nodded, though he could see her disappointment at the prospect of a cold meal and an even colder night. The temperature at this elevation dropped considerably after sunset, and without a fire, it would be a challenge to stay warm. They ate in silence, sharing the last of the bread Samuel had provided, along with dried fruit and jerky. As the light faded completely, leaving them in the deep blue twilight of the mountain forest, Heath made a decision. "We should share the bedrolls tonight," he said, keeping his voice matter-of-fact to hide his own discomfort at the suggestion. "For warmth." Winifred looked startled, then understanding dawned in her eyes. "Of course, it's the practical thing to do." They arranged the bedrolls side by side, creating a makeshift double bed on the soft pine needles that carpeted the forest floor. Heath removed his boots but kept the rest of his clothing on, as did Winifred. They lay down awkwardly, leaving a small space between them. For several minutes they lay rigid, both acutely aware of the other's presence. Then a gust of wind swept through their campsite, causing Winifred to shiver violently. "This is ridiculous," Heath muttered, closing the gap between them and cautiously putting an arm around her. "Better." She nodded, gradually relaxing against him. "Much, thank you." Heath tried to focus on practical matters, their route for tomorrow. How much further to Sacramento? The supplies they would need to replenish. But his thoughts kept returning to the woman in his arms, to the delicate scent of her hair and the warmth of her body against his. "Heath," Winifred whispered after a long silence, "what do you think will happen when we reach Sacramento?" "James will help us address the legal issues," he answered. "Bradford's accusations, your right to refuse the marriage, and after that, will you return to San Jose?" The question hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken meanings. Heath found himself at a crossroads, one he hadn't anticipated when he'd first decided to rescue the schoolteacher from Bradford's cellar. "I don't know," he admitted. "Much depends on how things unfold. Bradford isn't a man to forgive a slight." "I don't want to be the cause of more hardship for you," Winifred said, her voice barely audible. "You've already risked so much." Heath shifted slightly, looking down at her face in the moonlight that filtered through the trees. "Winifred, I made my choice when I decided to help you. I don't regret it." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of the connection that had formed so quickly and unexpectedly. Winifred lifted a hand to his face, her fingers brushing against the stubble on his cheek. "I don't regret it either," she whispered. "Any of it." Heath's heart hammered in his chest as he lowered his face toward hers, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Instead, she closed the remaining distance, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that started tentatively but quickly deepened with shared longing. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. Heath rested his forehead against hers, a mixture of exhilaration and caution warring within him. "We should sleep," he said reluctantly. "The journey tomorrow will be demanding." Winifred nodded, settling her head against his chest. "Good night, Heath." "Good night, Winifred." Despite his exhaustion, sleep eluded Heath for hours as he held the sleeping woman in his arms, his mind racing with possibilities and fears in equal measure. The sound of distant gunfire woke them before dawn. Heath was on his feet instantly, reaching for his revolver as he scanned the dark forest around them. "What is it?" Winifred asked, her voice thick with sleep. "Hunting party, maybe," Heath replied, though he didn't believe it. Hunters rarely fired their weapons before full light. "Or Bradford's men searching for us." The shots had come from the east, the direction they had been heading. If it was indeed Bradford's men, they had managed to get ahead of them somehow, perhaps anticipating their route toward Sacramento. "We need to change direction," Heath decided, quickly gathering their belongings. "Head north instead. It will take longer to reach Sacramento, but it might throw them off our trail." They set out as soon as there was enough light to navigate safely through the trees. The terrain became increasingly difficult, with steep inclines and rocky passages that forced them to dismount frequently and lead the horse on foot. By midday, They had reached a high ridge that offered a view of the surrounding landscape. Heath studied the terrain carefully, trying to get his bearings. In the distance, he could make out a column of smoke rising from what appeared to be a small settlement in the valley below. "That might be Riverton," he said, pointing. "It's off the main routes, mostly miners and a few families. We could resupply there, maybe get information about whether Bradford's men have been through." Winifred nodded, squinting against the bright sunlight. "Do you think it's safe?" "Safer than continuing without food or knowing what we're up against," Heath replied. "We'll approach cautiously." The descent into the valley took the remainder of the day, the path so treacherous in places that they had to backtrack and find alternative routes. By the time they reached the outskirts of Riverton, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the cluster of buildings that comprised the settlement. Riverton was smaller than Heath had remembered a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, and perhaps 24 modest homes scattered along a single dirt street. A few horses were tethered outside the saloon, and lamplight glowed in some of the windows, but otherwise, the place was quiet. "Wait here," Heath instructed Winifred, helping her dismount in a small grove of trees just beyond the settlement. "I'll go see what I can learn." "Be careful," she urged, her hand lingering on his arm. Heath nodded, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze before heading toward the general store. The building was still open, a bell tinkling above the door as he entered. The proprietor, a middle-aged woman with her hair pulled back in a severe bun, looked up from her ledger. "Evening," she greeted him. "Don't get many strangers this time of year. What can I help you with?" Heath removed his hat, adopting a casual demeanor. "Just passing through, madam. Need to resupply before continuing north." The woman studied him for a moment, her gaze sharp. "North, eh? Not much up that way except mining camps and wilderness." "I have business in the camps," Heath lied smoothly. "Looking for a man who owes money to my employer in San Francisco." The explanation seemed to satisfy her. She nodded toward the shelves. "Help yourself to what you need. Cash only, we don't extend credit to travelers." As Heath selected provisions, he casually asked, "Any trouble in these parts lately? I heard gunfire earlier today." The woman's expression hardened. "There were men through here yesterday asking questions about a man and woman traveling together. Said the woman had been kidnapped from San Jose. Offered a substantial reward for information." Heath kept his face neutral despite the alarm that surged through him. "That's so. Sounds serious." "Indeed." They showed a drawing of the woman, pretty thing. Schoolteacher, they said, and described the man as a former ranch hand with a grudge against her intended. "Did anyone in town have information for them?" Heath asked, keeping his tone merely curious. The woman snorted. "Riverton folks mind their own business. Besides, those men had a look about them that didn't invite trust." She narrowed her eyes at Heath. "You haven't seen such a pair on your travels, have you?" "Can't say that I have," Heath replied, gathering his purchases. "How much do I owe you?" After paying, Heath ventured to the saloon, reasoning that if Bradford's men had been in town, the patrons might have more information. The establishment was sparsely populated, a few miners at a table playing cards, a lone man at the bar, and the bartender polishing glasses with a questionable-looking rag. Heath ordered a whiskey, using the time it took to pour to survey the room more carefully. None of the men looked familiar, and none paid him more than passing attention as he took his drink to a corner table. The card players were deep in conversation, their voices carrying in the quiet room. Heath listened casually as he sipped his whiskey, alert for any mention of Bradford or the search. "Heard they're offering $500 now," one of the miners was saying. "For a school teacher, can you imagine? Must be more to it than they're saying," another replied. No man offers that kind of money just for a woman unless she's carrying something valuable. Or knows something dangerous, the third suggested. Either way, not our concern. Those men were trouble. Headed east this morning, the first added. Said they had information the pair was trying to reach Sacramento. Heath finished his drink, leaving a coin on the table before exiting the saloon. The news was both concerning and somewhat reassuring. Bradford's men were searching in the wrong direction, but the increased reward suggested their pursuers were growing desperate. He returned to where Winifred waited, finding her exactly where he'd left her, though clearly anxious. "Any news?" she asked as soon as he approached. Heath nodded, quickly relating what he'd learned. "They're looking east, which gives us an advantage, but the reward has increased. We need to be even more cautious now." Winifred's face paled in the moonlight. $500. Bradford must be furious. Or desperate, Heath suggested. Either way, we should move on. There's a trapper's cabin about half a day's ride north of here. We can shelter there tonight and continue towards Sacramento by a different route tomorrow. They left Riverton behind, traveling under the cover of darkness for several miles before Heath deemed it safe to make camp. The night was clear and cold, stars blazing overhead in a black velvet sky as they shared a meal of bread, cheese, and dried meat from Heath's purchases. "Heath," Winifred said as they prepared for sleep, "I've been thinking about what happens when we reach Sacramento." He looked up from spreading their bedrolls, noting the determination in her expression. "What about it? I can't ask you to continue risking yourself for me indefinitely. Once we reach the city and speak with your lawyer friend, perhaps it would be best if we parted ways." Heath felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the night air. "Is that what you want?" "It's not about what I want," she replied, her voice tight with emotion. "It's about what's practical. You have your life, your work. I've disrupted that enough already." "Winifred," Heath said, moving to stand before her. "Look at me." She raised her eyes to his, moonlight reflecting the unshed tears that glistened there. "When I found you in that cellar, I made a choice. Not just to rescue you, but to see this through, whatever it takes. I'm not abandoning you in Sacramento or anywhere else. Not unless you truly want me to go." Winifred shook her head, a tear escaping to trail down her cheek. "I don't want you to go. That's what frightens me. In such a short time you've become—" She hesitated, searching for words. "Important to me. More than important." Heath raised a hand to her face, gently wiping away the tear with his thumb. "And you to me. I don't know what the future holds, Winifred, but I want to face it together, if you'll have me." Her answer was to step forward into his embrace, her arms encircling his waist as she pressed her face against his chest. Heath held her tightly, his cheek resting on the top of her head, a sense of rightness settling over him despite the dangers that still surrounded them. They spent that night in each other's arms again, the shared warmth as much emotional as physical. By unspoken agreement, they limited themselves to kisses and gentle touches, both aware of the impropriety of their situation and unwilling to complicate it further until they reached safety. The next morning brought heavy fog, a dense white blanket that limited visibility to a few yards in any direction. While it made navigation challenging, Heath saw it as a blessing. The fog would hide them from any searching eyes as effectively as the night had done. They rode slowly through the ghostly landscape, the world around them reduced to vague shadows, and the occasional looming shape of a tree or boulder emerging from the whiteness. The silence was profound, broken only by the sound of their horses' hooves on the damp earth and their own quiet conversation. "Tell me about your lawyer friend," Winifred requested as they navigated a particularly narrow trail. "How do you know him?" "James and I grew up together in Missouri," Heath explained. "His family lived on the next farm over. We were inseparable as boys, though our paths diverged when he went east to study law and I came west with my father. Yet you maintained the friendship." Heath nodded, though Winifred couldn't see the gesture from her position behind him on the horse. "We write occasionally. When I pass through Sacramento, we share a meal and catch up. He's done well for himself, has a practice focusing on property law and contracts." "Do you think he can help with our situation? If anyone can navigate the legal aspects, it's James. He knows the law better than anyone I've met, and he has connections in the Sacramento courts." Heath paused, considering his next words carefully. "But our best option might be to continue north after consulting with him. Perhaps to Oregon or Washington Territory, where Bradford's influence doesn't reach." "You would leave California?" Winifred asked, surprise evident in her voice. "Your work, your life here." "A fresh start might be the safest path," Heath replied. "For both of us." Winifred was quiet for a long moment, her arms tightening slightly around his waist. "I never imagined my decision to refuse Bradford's arrangement would lead to all of this, to uprooting your life as well as my own." "Life rarely follows the paths we imagine," Heath said softly. "Sometimes the unexpected turns lead us exactly where we need to be." The fog began to lift by midday, revealing a landscape of rolling hills covered in tall grass and scattered oak trees. They had left the forest behind, emerging into more open country that would eventually lead to the Sacramento Valley. Heath estimated they were still 2 days' ride from the city, assuming they encountered no further complications. The terrain was easier now, allowing them to make better time, but the lack of cover also made them more visible to anyone who might be searching. They stopped to rest by a small creek, allowing their horse to drink while they stretched their legs and ate a light meal. Heath spread the map Samuel had given them on a flat rock, tracing their route with his finger. "If we follow this creek east for a few miles, then turn north again, we should reach the old mining road by nightfall," he explained. "From there, it's a straight shot to Sacramento." Winifred leaned over his shoulder to study the map, her nearness sending a familiar warmth through him. "It seems we're making good progress despite the detours." "We are," Heath agreed. "With luck, we'll reach James by the day after tomorrow." As he folded the map, a movement on the distant hillside caught Heath's attention. He squinted against the midday sun, making out the shapes of riders, at least 3, possibly more, moving in their direction. "We need to move," he said urgently, gathering their belongings. "Riders coming this way." Winifred's eyes widened with alarm as she spotted the approaching horsemen. "Bradford's men. Can't be sure, but we can't risk it. The creek bed offers some cover. We'll follow it as far as we can." They mounted quickly, Heath urging their horse down into the shallow creek where the water would mask their tracks. They rode in the streambed for nearly a mile, the cold water splashing up to soak their boots and the lower portions of their clothing. When the creek bent sharply east, away from their intended route, Heath reluctantly led them back onto dry land, hoping they had put enough distance between themselves and the riders to avoid detection. They pushed hard through the afternoon, alternating between a fast trot and a canter when the terrain allowed. Their horse was showing signs of fatigue, its coat dark with sweat, but Heath knew they couldn't afford to rest until they reached more secure shelter. The sun was low on the horizon when they finally spotted the mining road, a wider, more established path that had once served the gold fields, but was now used primarily by farmers and merchants traveling between the smaller settlements and Sacramento. "We should avoid the road itself," Heath decided. "Travel parallel to it, but stay within the trees where possible." They made camp that night in a dense thicket some 100 yards from the road, not daring to light a fire despite the increasing chill. Their meal was cold and hurried, both too exhausted and anxious for conversation. As they settled into their now shared bedroll, Winifred pressed close against Heath's side, seeking his warmth and reassurance. "You think we lost them?" she whispered. "I hope so," he replied, his arms secure around her shoulders. "But we'll maintain caution until we reach Sacramento." Winifred nodded against his chest, her body gradually relaxing as exhaustion claimed her. Heath remained awake longer, listening to the night sounds and the steady rhythm of her breathing, his mind calculating distances and contingencies should they encounter Bradford's men again. It was near dawn when the sound of horses on the nearby road woke him. Heath extricated himself carefully from Winifred's embrace, moving silently to the edge of their thicket to observe the riders passing by. In the gray pre-dawn light, he could make out 5 men moving at a steady pace toward Sacramento. Though he couldn't clearly see their faces, something about their posture and the purposeful way they rode suggested these weren't ordinary travelers. He returned to where Winifred still slept, gently waking her. "We need to move," he whispered. "I think Bradford's men are ahead of us on the road." They broke camp quickly and quietly, heading northeast away from the road before curving back toward Sacramento by a more circuitous route. The day was overcast, threatening rain, which Heath considered both blessing and curse. Good for concealment, but potentially miserable for travel if the skies opened. By midday, fat raindrops began to fall, quickly turning into a steady downpour that soaked through their clothing and made the terrain treacherous. Their progress slowed considerably as they navigated muddy slopes and swollen streams. "We need shelter," Heath finally admitted as Winifred began to shiver uncontrollably behind him. "There should be a way station a few miles ahead. We'll have to risk it." The way station was little more than a crude stable with an attached room where travelers could take shelter during inclement weather. When they arrived, Heath was relieved to find it unoccupied, though the fresh manure in the stable area suggested others had passed through recently. He helped Winifred down from the horse, supporting her when her stiff limbs threatened to give way beneath her. Inside the single room, they found a stone fireplace, a rough wooden table with 2 benches, and a platform built against one wall that served as a bed. Heath quickly set about building a fire while Winifred wrung the water from her hair and outer garments as best she could. The kindling caught readily, and soon a cheerful blaze was warming the small space. "You should get out of those wet clothes," Heath said, not meeting her eyes. "I'll tend to the horse and bring in our packs. You can wrap yourself in the blanket from my bedroll until your things dry." When he returned from settling the horse in the stable area, he found Winifred sitting close to the fire, wrapped in his blanket as he'd suggested. Her dress and petticoats hung from pegs near the hearth, steam rising from them as they began to dry. Her hair, freed from its pins, fell in damp waves around her shoulders. Heath set down their packs, suddenly acutely aware of the intimacy of their situation. "I should probably." He gestured vaguely toward the door. "Don't be ridiculous," Winifred said, a hint of a smile on her lips despite her still present shivering. "You're as soaked as I was. You need to dry your clothes too." Heath hesitated, then nodded. He turned his back to her, removing his sodden jacket and shirt, hanging them beside her garments. After a moment's consideration, he decided his trousers were wet enough to risk impropriety, removing them as well but keeping on his long underwear for modesty's sake. He wrapped himself in the remaining blanket from their supplies and joined Winifred by the fire, careful to maintain a respectful distance despite their previous nights spent in each other's arms. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the crackling of the fire and the steady drumming of rain on the roof the only sounds in the small room. The warmth gradually returned to Heath's limbs, along with an awareness of Winifred's presence beside him, her profile illuminated by the firelight, the curve of her neck where damp tendrils of hair clung to her skin. "Heath," she said suddenly, turning to face him. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about a fresh start in Oregon or Washington." He nodded, waiting for her to continue. "If that's what we decide, I want you to know that I don't expect. That is, I wouldn't presume that you—" She faltered, color rising in her cheeks. "What I mean to say is that you shouldn't feel obligated to accompany me out of some sense of duty or responsibility." Heath studied her face, reading the uncertainty there, despite the determined set of her jaw. "Winifred, are you trying to give me permission to leave once we reach safety?" She nodded, not quite meeting his eyes. "You've already done far more than anyone could have expected. Your life shouldn't be completely derailed because of my situation." "And if I want my life to take this new direction?" Heath asked softly. "If I want to be wherever you are, not out of obligation, but because these past days have shown me a future I never knew I wanted." Winifred's eyes lifted to his, hope and uncertainty warring in their depths. "Do you mean that?" Instead of answering with words, Heath closed the distance between them, his hand coming up to cup her cheek as he kissed her with all the emotion that had been building since the moment he'd helped her from that cellar. Winifred responded immediately, her blanket slipping from her shoulders as she wound her arms around his neck. The kiss deepened, years of solitude and restraint giving way to a hunger that surprised them both. Heath pulled back slightly, his breathing uneven. "Winifred, we should stop. This isn't proper, and you deserve better than—" She pressed a finger to his lips, silencing him. "Heath Thornton, I think we left proper behind the moment you broke down that cellar door. I know what I want, and it's you. Not because you rescued me, but because of who you are, the man who risked everything for a woman he barely knew because it was the right thing to do." Heath captured her hand in his, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Are you certain? Once we cross this line, there's no going back." "I've never been more certain of anything," Winifred replied, her eyes clear and steady on his. The blankets fell away as they came together again, the firelight casting a golden glow on their skin as they explored this new territory with reverent hands and whispered words of affection. Outside, the rain continued to fall, creating a cocoon of privacy around the small way station where two people who had been strangers a week ago discovered the depth of the connection that had formed between them. Later, as they lay entwined beneath the blankets on the platform bed, Winifred rested her head on Heath's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Heath's fingers traced idle patterns on her bare shoulder as he considered the question. "We continue to Sacramento as planned. Speak with James about the legal aspects of your situation. Then, if you're willing, we head north to start our new life together." "Together," Winifred repeated, the word both statement and question. Heath tilted her chin up to meet his gaze. "I love you, Winifred Kent. I know it's happened fast and some might call it madness, but I know what I feel. If you'll have me, I want to build that future with you, the home I've dreamed of, perhaps a school where you can teach." Tears glistened in Winifred's eyes. "I love you too, Heath. And yes, I'll have you today, tomorrow, for all the days to come." He sealed the promise with a kiss, both aware that challenges still lay ahead but confident in their ability to face them together. The rain stopped sometime in the night, leaving a world washed clean when they emerged from the way station the following morning. Their clothes were dry, if somewhat wrinkled, and their spirits were high despite the remaining journey to Sacramento. They rode more openly now, staying on the main road since stealth seemed less important than speed given their proximity to the city. The countryside became gradually more settled as they progressed, isolated farms giving way to more frequent homesteads, and eventually to the outskirts of Sacramento itself. The city was a stark contrast to the wilderness they had traveled through, streets bustling with wagons and pedestrians, buildings pressed close together, the sounds of commerce and civilization surrounding them after days of relative silence. Heath guided them through the busy streets toward the more affluent section of town where James Sullivan had his law practice and residence. The two-story building was impressive, but not ostentatious, with a brass plaque beside the door announcing Sullivan Law Offices. They tethered their horse to the hitching post, both taking a moment to straighten their travel-worn appearance before Heath knocked on the door. A clerk answered, eyebrows rising slightly at their disheveled state. "May I help you?" he asked, his tone suggesting he doubted he could. "Please inform Mr. Sullivan that Heath Thornton is here to see him on an urgent matter," Heath replied, his manner firm despite their bedraggled appearance. The clerk hesitated, then nodded. "Wait here, please." He disappeared into the interior of the building, returning moments later with a tall man in his early 30s, whose serious expression gave way to surprise, and then delight as he recognized Heath. "Heath Thornton, as I live and breathe," James exclaimed, stepping forward to clasp Heath's hand warmly. "What brings you to my doorstep looking like you've been chased by bears?" "Not bears, James, but men who might be more dangerous," Heath replied. "This is Miss Winifred Kent. We need your help." James's expression sobered as he took in Heath's serious tone and the wary look in Winifred's eyes. "Of course. Come inside, both of you. Whatever trouble you're in, we'll sort it out." In the privacy of James's office, a handsome room lined with law books and furnished with heavy oak pieces, Heath and Winifred related the entire story, from her imprisonment in Bradford's cellar to their journey to Sacramento. James listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on the paper before him. When they finished, he sat back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Bradford has considerable influence, but he has overstepped the law in this instance. Imprisonment is a serious offense, regardless of his motivations. He's claiming I kidnapped Miss Kent," Heath pointed out, "and offering a substantial reward for information." James nodded. "Yes, that complicates matters. Your word against his, and he has the resources to make his version the official narrative." He turned to Winifred. "Miss Kent, was there any formal contract or agreement regarding this proposed marriage?" Winifred shook her head. "No. Mr. Bradford approached me after church services 2 weeks ago, informing me that he had arranged a match between myself and the son of his business partner, a Mr. Hollister. When I declined, he became increasingly insistent, claiming I owed him for my position in the community. And the imprisonment occurred when you maintained your refusal." "Yes. He summoned me to his home under the pretense of discussing school matters. When I arrived, he demanded I reconsider the arrangement. When I refused again, he had 2 of his ranch hands escort me to the cellar. I was there from morning until after nightfall when Heath rescued me." James made another note. "Were there witnesses to your imprisonment besides Bradford and his men?" "The housekeeper brought me water once," Winifred recalled. "She seemed uncomfortable with the situation but didn't speak to me." James tapped his pen against the desk, considering. "We have enough to file charges against Bradford for unlawful imprisonment, but whether they would stick is another matter. His influence with the local judiciary in San Jose is substantial." He looked at Heath. "And the charges of kidnapping against you would be difficult to disprove without Miss Kent's testimony, which some might discount given the circumstances. What do you suggest?" Heath asked. James stood, pacing behind his desk as he thought. "Your instinct to leave California might be the wisest course. I have colleagues in Portland who could assist you in establishing yourselves there. However, he paused, turning back to face them. Running has its own implications. It might be seen as an admission of guilt on Heath's part. I won't have Heath labeled a criminal because of me, Winifred said firmly. James studied her for a moment, then nodded. There might be a third option. I have some influence with the governor's office. If I can secure a meeting, and you both make your case directly, we might be able to obtain official intervention, a statement clearing Heath of wrongdoing and perhaps even sanctions against Bradford. How long would that take? Heath asked. A few days at most to arrange the meeting. In the meantime, you'll stay with me as my guests. My home is secure, and Bradford would not dare to make a move against the governor's legal advisor. James smiled slightly at their surprised expressions. Yes, that's one of my positions, though I maintain my private practice as well. The offer was too good to refuse. After the rigors of their journey and the constant fear of pursuit, the prospect of safety and a legal resolution was immensely appealing. They accepted gratefully, following James to his home, a handsome residence not far from his offices. James's wife, Eleanor, welcomed them warmly despite their unexpected arrival, quickly arranging for baths, clean clothing, and a substantial meal. By the time they sat down to dinner that evening, Heath and Winifred felt more human than they had in days. You'll sleep in separate rooms, of course, Eleanor informed them as she showed them to their accommodations after dinner. The guest room for Miss Kent and the study for Mr. Thornton. James has had a cot brought in. Heath and Winifred exchanged a glance, both aware of the irony of separate sleeping arrangements after their night at the way station, but neither willing to explain the true nature of their relationship to their hosts just yet. Thank you for your hospitality, Mrs. Sullivan, Winifred said sincerely. Your kindness means more than I can express. Eleanor patted her arm gently. James told me something of your ordeal. No woman should be forced into marriage against her will, especially not through such reprehensible means. You're safe here, dear. That night, Heath lay awake on the cot in James's study, staring at the ceiling and thinking of Winifred just down the hall. Their relationship had progressed with such startling speed that it felt strange to be separated now, even by just a few walls. He wondered if she was also awake, thinking of him. The next morning, James left early for his offices, promising to begin arrangements for the meeting with the governor's office. Eleanor proved to be an engaging hostess, showing Winifred around the house and garden while Heath took the opportunity to tend to their horse and examine the damage to his revolver, which had gotten wet during their rainy journey. When James returned in the afternoon, his expression was triumphant. It's arranged, he announced as they gathered in the parlor. The governor will see you tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. That's wonderful news, Winifred exclaimed. How did you manage it so quickly? James smiled. The governor has a particular interest in education, Miss Kent. When I mentioned that one of the few qualified teachers in the San Jose area had been unlawfully imprisoned for refusing an arranged marriage, he was most disturbed. He sees it as a matter requiring immediate attention. And what of Bradford? Heath asked. Will he be informed of the meeting? No, James replied. This is an opportunity for you to present your case directly without interference. Based on the governor's response, appropriate actions will be determined. The evening was spent preparing for the meeting, James coaching them on protocol and the most effective way to present their story. Eleanor helping Winifred select appropriate attire from her own wardrobe, since Winifred's traveling dress was hardly suitable for a gubernatorial audience. Heath and Winifred had little opportunity for private conversation, but their glances across the dinner table and the brief touch of hands when passing in the hallway conveyed their shared anticipation and anxiety about the coming day. The governor's office was located in an imposing building in the heart of Sacramento. Heath, dressed in borrowed clothing that fit surprisingly well, felt out of place among the politicians and officials who moved through the corridors with confident purpose. Beside him, Winifred appeared calm, though he could sense her tension in the way she clasped her hands tightly before her. James led them through the bureaucratic maze with practiced ease, eventually ushering them into a waiting area outside the governor's private office. "Remember," he reminded them quietly, "speak truthfully and directly. The governor appreciates straightforwardness." They were admitted precisely at 10 o'clock. Governor Pacheco was a dignified man with an attentive gaze that seemed to evaluate them as they entered. He gestured for them to be seated in the chairs arranged before his massive desk. "Mr. Sullivan has informed me of the unusual circumstances that bring you here," the governor began without preamble. "I would like to hear the full account from you directly." Winifred spoke first, relating her story with remarkable composure given the subject matter. Heath then explained his intervention, careful to emphasize that he had acted out of concern for her safety rather than any personal grievance against Bradford. Throughout their accounts, the governor listened attentively, occasionally asking a clarifying question but otherwise allowing them to speak without interruption. When they had finished, he turned to James. "You believe their account to be accurate, Mr. Sullivan?" "I do, Your Excellency," James replied. "I have known Mr. Thornton since childhood and can vouch for his character. Miss Kent's reputation in San Jose was exemplary until these recent events. Mr. Bradford's actions, while perhaps motivated by business interests, were clearly outside the bounds of law." The governor nodded slowly. "I am inclined to agree. Forced marriage has no place in our state, regardless of the parties involved or their standing in the community." He turned back to Heath and Winifred. "What is it you seek from this office?" Heath glanced at Winifred, who nodded slightly for him to speak. "First, protection for Miss Kent from further attempts to coerce her into an unwanted marriage. Second, clearing of any suggestion that I kidnapped her, as Bradford has claimed in his search notices." "And what are your intentions now?" the governor asked, his gaze moving between them. "Do you plan to return to San Jose?" Winifred hesitated, then spoke with quiet determination. "With respect, Your Excellency, that depends on whether it would be safe to do so. I came to California to teach, and I take that responsibility seriously, but recent events have changed circumstances." The governor's perceptive eyes noted the way Heath shifted slightly closer to Winifred, the protective stance he unconsciously adopted. A slight smile touched his lips. "I see," he said. "Well, I believe we can address these matters effectively. Mr. Sullivan, prepare the necessary documents for my signature, a formal statement clearing Mr. Thornton of any wrongdoing in this matter, and an official censure of Mr. Bradford for his actions against Miss Kent." James nodded, clearly pleased with the outcome. "Additionally," the governor continued, "I will send instructions to the sheriff in San Jose regarding this matter. Mr. Bradford will be informed that any further attempts to interfere with Miss Kent's freedom will result in formal charges." "Thank you, Your Excellency," Winifred said, relief evident in her voice. "As for your future plans," the governor added, "I understand if San Jose no longer feels welcoming. However, there is a new settlement in the northern part of the state, near Mount Shasta, that is in desperate need of a qualified teacher. The community is growing rapidly, and the climate is said to be quite pleasant." He glanced at Heath. "I believe they are also establishing a regular mail route and will need reliable men to maintain it." The offer was unexpected but not unwelcome. Heath and Winifred exchanged a look of silent communication, both recognizing the opportunity being presented a fresh start, but still within California with positions that suited their skills. "That's a generous suggestion, Your Excellency," Heath said. "We would be interested in learning more about this opportunity." "Excellent. Mr. Sullivan can provide the details." The governor rose, indicating the meeting was concluding. "I wish you both well in your endeavors. California needs dedicated teachers and honest men to help build our future." They left the governor's office with a sense of cautious optimism, James beaming with satisfaction at the successful resolution. "This is better than I had hoped," he told them as they walked back toward his offices. "Not only has the governor cleared Heath's name, but he's effectively offered you both positions in a community where Bradford has no influence." "It seems almost too good to be true," Winifred admitted. "After everything we've been through, to have matters resolved so neatly." "The governor is a pragmatic man," James explained. "He sees the value in directing qualified people to areas of need within the state, and the settlement near Mount Shasta truly is in need of a teacher. The offer benefits all involved." Heath took Winifred's hand in his, no longer concerned about appearances now that their immediate crisis had passed. "What do you think? Mount Shasta is a long way from San Jose, but not as far as Oregon or Washington." Winifred squeezed his hand. "I think it sounds perfect. A place where we can build something together, as we discussed." James raised an eyebrow at their clasped hands but made no comment beyond a knowing smile. "I'll have the official documents by tomorrow. In the meantime, you're welcome to continue staying with Alina and me while you make preparations for your journey north." The next few days passed in a flurry of activity. The governor was true to his word. The official documents arrived promptly, clearing Heath of any wrongdoing and censuring Bradford for his actions. James provided them with letters of introduction to prominent citizens in the Mount Shasta settlement, as well as detailed information about the teaching position and the proposed mail route. Heath sold their weary horse and purchased a sturdy wagon and a team to pull it, using the remainder of his savings to stock supplies for the journey north. Winifred, with Alina's help, acquired suitable clothing and household items that would serve them in their new life. On the evening before their departure, as they sat in James and Alina's garden enjoying a farewell dinner, Heath cleared his throat nervously. "There's one more matter we should address before leaving Sacramento," he said, glancing at Winifred. She looked at him questioningly, though a smile played at the corners of her mouth as if she suspected what was coming. Heath turned to James. "I wonder if you might direct us to a minister tomorrow morning before we depart. Winifred and I would like to be married before beginning our journey." Alina clapped her hands in delight, while James chuckled. "I suspected as much from the way you two have been looking at each other. I'm happy to arrange it. In fact, our own minister would be honored to perform the ceremony right here in our home, if that suits you." "That would be perfect," Winifred said, her eyes shining as she looked at Heath. "Though I'm afraid I don't have anything suitable for a wedding." "Nonsense," Alina declared. "I have a lovely blue dress that would be perfect with a few quick alterations. And every bride needs something borrowed. It might as well be her wedding dress." The wedding took place the following morning, a simple, heartfelt ceremony with James and Alina as witnesses. Winifred was radiant in Alina's altered blue dress, a small bouquet of garden flowers in her hands. Heath, in his borrowed suit, felt a sense of rightness as he spoke his vows, promising to love and protect Winifred for all the days of his life. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Heath kissed his bride, his heart full to bursting with love and gratitude for the strange twist of fate that had led him to that cellar door in San Jose. They departed Sacramento shortly afterward, their wagon laden with supplies and gifts from the Sullivans. The journey to Mount Shasta would take several weeks, but neither minded the prospect of the long trip. They were together, legally bound as husband and wife, with the promise of a new life ahead of them. The settlement near Mount Shasta welcomed them warmly, the need for a teacher and a reliable mail carrier making them valuable additions to the growing community. They purchased a plot of land on the edge of town, building a modest home with a large garden that Winifred tended with care. The schoolhouse was small but adequate, and Winifred quickly established herself as a dedicated and innovative teacher. Heath's mail route covered the surrounding areas, bringing him home to Winifred several times a week. On the days when his route kept him in town, he helped construct additional buildings for the expanding settlement, earning extra income and the respect of his neighbors. News eventually reached them that Bradford had fallen on hard times. His business partner had withdrawn from their arrangement after learning of Bradford's censure by the governor, and many of his ranch hands had sought employment elsewhere when word of his actions toward Winifred spread. "You ever regret leaving San Jose?" Heath asked Winifred one evening as they sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint Mount Shasta in shades of gold and pink. Winifred, her hand resting protectively over the slight swell of her belly where their first child was growing, shook her head. "Never. Sometimes the most challenging moments in our lives lead us exactly where we're meant to be." Heath covered her hand with his own, marveling at the journey that had brought them to this peaceful moment. From a cellar door in San Jose to a home of their own, with a child on the way and a community that respected them, it was more than he had ever dared to dream. "I love you, Mrs. Thornton," he said softly, leaning over to kiss her temple. "And I love you, Mr. Thornton," she replied, turning her face to meet his lips with hers. "Today, tomorrow, for all the days to come." In the years that followed, their family grew first with the birth of their son, Michael, and 2 years later, their daughter, Sarah. The settlement expanded into a proper town, with Winifred's school growing along with it. Heath eventually established a small ranch adjacent to their property, combining cattle, raising with his continued work for the mail service. They never returned to San Jose, but occasionally received letters from James and Alina, keeping them informed of events in the capital and in their former town. Bradford had indeed lost much of his influence and eventually sold his ranch, moving east to start anew. On the 10th anniversary of the day Heath had broken down that cellar door, they held a special celebration not to commemorate the fear and danger of that time, but to honor the courage and love that had emerged from it. Friends and neighbors gathered in their home, children played in the yard, and Heath and Winifred shared secret smiles, both remembering the unlikely beginning of their journey together. Later that night, as they lay in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Winifred traced the lines of Heath's face with gentle fingers. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" he asked, capturing her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "For breaking down that door, for carrying me to freedom, for showing me what true love looks like." Heath pulled her close, overwhelmed as always by the depth of his feelings for this remarkable woman who had become his wife, the mother of his children, the center of his world. "Thank you for being worth rescuing," he replied. "For being brave enough to build this life with me." Outside their window, the stars wheeled overhead, the same stars that had watched over them on that desperate journey from San Jose to Sacramento. But now they shone down on a home filled with love, a family bound by choice rather than obligation, and a future still unfolding with promise and possibility. For Heath and Winifred Thornton, the greatest adventure had not been the escape from Bradford's cellar or the race to Sacramento, but the life they had created together in its aftermath, a life of purpose, passion, and profound joy that neither could have imagined on that fateful night when a cowboy broke down a door and carried a schoolteacher to freedom.